Welcome to the third series of Church Beyond the Walls podcast, and who better to have on episode 1 than Simon Kilpatrick? Thank
you.
You came the whole way. No, you didn't really. You were coming to meet me, and then we decided to do a podcast.
Absolutely, last minute.
I know, but here, it's brilliant. Listen, for anybody who doesn't know Simon, I'm sure if you're involved in the Methodist Church in Ireland, they will, I recognise that boy. But tell us a wee bit about Simon. Who is Simon Kilpatrick?
Well, coming up here, I thought it was just going to be audio, so they may recognise me because they actually see me. I didn't realise it was on video. I would have dressed proper and
Dickie bow,
done my hair and everything.
Combed it this way instead of this way.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I work at the Methodist Church Home Mission Department, and particularly around Pioneer Mission. So kind of supporting and encouraging Pioneer Mission happening all across the connection. I've been doing it for, 7 or 8 years now. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Supporting people like yourself and others, gathering Pioneer Mission, kind of pushing the church beyond what is. So that's what I do at the Methodist Church. I have 3 other jobs as well. I work with a local church in Blackrock, Urban Junction, which people might know, although finishing up with that soon. I'm not sure when this podcast comes out, but it'll be the next few months. And then I also work in a school as a chaplain, and also work with Praxis one day a week, just kind of reimagining mission for ordinary people, helping people.
It's really funny you mentioned the school, because I do remember messaging you probably about 2 or 3 months ago, and you were like, there's a picture off a bus in Uganda. Yes. Was it Uganda? Was it?
It was Uganda. Yeah.
And then like a few days later, it was you watching the Man United match in Uganda. Class. I love it. But who is Simon? Let's start there. Who are you? Who are you?
I am. Where do you start? Who am I? I live in Wicklow. I'm married to Cheryl. We've been together since I was 18. She was 16. So it's a long time. I've known her home my life. We have 3 kids, 3 girls, 16, 14 and 9. I enjoy lots of different things. I do play a bit of football, support Man United. Play a bit of football, as in I play 5-a-side, 6-a-side. Okay. It's not like club football.
Not 11-a-side.
No, definitely couldn't imagine 11-a-side. I love travelling, seeing new places. I love adrenaline stuff. We were just on about Alton Towers and roller coasters, that kind of thing. Enjoy being outdoors.
Awesome. So when let's actually start with your faith journey. Like when did that all begin for you?
I grew up in a Methodist church close to where I lived, and I have been part of it for most of my life. It wasn't really until I kind of got involved probably in youth work. There was kind of key people in my life who had an influence on me, who kind of spent time with me. That was a big impact. And then I think actually one of the turning points, I think, for me in my life, I would have said I was a Christian up to that point, but it actually wasn't until I think probably my imagination for the church was always as someone who would teach and preach from the front and do pastoral care. And I didn't really see anything beyond that. I didn't see any example of what it looked like to be engaged in evangelism and mission. And probably a big turning point for me was seeing people beyond the walls of the church, and how is the church going to possibly engage with those? And I think that was a big turning point for me, and helping me see that discipleship is more than just internal and is more than just what I do on a Sunday morning or a Bible study. Actually, when Jesus calls the disciples, he says, "Come and follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." It's that call to discipleship to walk with him, but it's also a call to engage in the world and see his kingdom being built. So that was a big turning point for me. And my faith obviously has grown in that. I think it was probably kind of late teens, early 20s when we started the disco bounce, and seeing people there who had no connection with church, and that was a big.
And let's touch on that, because that's class. So let's talk about bounce, right? How did that all start? When did it start? And what made you think that's a brilliant? Let's just start a disco.
It was a group of people. It wasn't just me. It was the late 90s, 98, I think was the first disco we ran, May 98. So I was kind of just coming out of school, and there was a group of people, young adults. I was part of it. I was there at the first one, May 98. So it's just over, 27 years ago, last month. And just being at it and seeing something different, seeing the church do something different, engage differently. Now, for a good number of years, a lot of church youth groups came along. So it was nice, and people travel from different places. But there was a particular turning point in the disco. I've probably told you about this before, Neil, where there was a stabbing, or that was what became known as a stabbing. Some guy broke a mirror in the gents' toilets and scratched someone on the arm, and the police were called in and the ambulance was called in, and there was lots of issues with it. But after that point, the church youth group stopped coming along, and a lot more local young people came along. So that was a big turning point, because we kind of aimed, we just started something. the building was there. The congregation had graciously kind of moved out. The building was vacant. There was a group of young adults around. What could we do with it? Disco was thought about. And it wasn't until that happened and that turning point happened that it became more credible for local young people to see that it wasn't just a church disco. So, there was a few moments in that. I remember having a conversation with two guys. They were probably 16, 17, rough enough guys. I came from middle class church, middle class background, so wouldn't have had that much engagement. I just remember having a really good conversation with them about, they were asking why we did and what we did, and talked a little bit about faith, and just a realization that these two guys are not going to come to the church I'm part of if they come to faith. And I think that hit me then, but it wasn't. It was further conversations beyond then, realizing that. And I remember a conversation with someone, it could be 5, 6, 7 years later, because I eventually started working there. I was only kind of part of a team at that point. So 2001, I think, was when I started there. And I just remember conversations with some young people who asked questions about faith and realizing again that they're not going to come to the church, even though actually it's only 10 minutes drive away. They're not going to come to a different town, to a different place with different people they don't know. We have to do something here. Now, it wasn't the intention to start a church at that point, but we need to do discipleship. We need to engage them here. We can't just invite them to my church when they become Christians, whatever that looks like. So that was a new realization. And again, realizing that, again, for me personally and my gifting, and realizing that my gifting or my heart or passions were more for mission and engaging people beyond the church. And realizing, I suppose I came alive in those situations and realizing I didn't have to go and stand at the front of church and lead a church. It was actually a part of engaging with people who, are far from church. So it was definitely a journey, and it evolved from running the disco once every 3 months to once a month to every 2 weeks. Some amazing times, some really scary times where we had lots of fights and lots of issues going on. But always kind of an adventure and a pushing out beyond. And I think just huge friendships and relationships were formed, and friendships I have with people still going on now. That kind of, I know Alan Hirsch in his books talks about what it looks like for team to form behind. Like, he used the word communitas rather than community, and that kind of friendship that's forged when you do stuff together, and doing those kind of things together were really significant. And friendships I still have, with people now, really strong relationships. And I think our heart then was always to engage people beyond church. And our heart now is still, we always try to say it's all about the Saturday night, not the Sunday. Yeah. And it was always about the disco, not the Sunday, not the church. Yeah. And it's trying to retain that, going, mission comes before church. And we need to engage with the community beside us. And then church follows. You've done Forge, Neil, and talking about that kind of, we need to focus on Jesus first, then mission, and then church. And do it in that order. Yeah. It's not church planting where we take church from point A and bring it to point B. It's actually, we need to start with Jesus, and where's Jesus at work? What does mission look like? How do we engage with people here? What's incarnational mission look like? And then how does church form out of that? Sorry, there's a very long answer to a very short question. It was a brilliant answer, and that's the end of the podcast. There's loads more to talk about. It's funny, I like what you said there about even as leadership. I saw a brilliant picture the other day, like one of those cartoon caricature things, where it showed a leader, with like the congregation or the group of people he was working with in like a cart. Yeah. And he was pulling it with a big long rope. Yeah. And then there was like the second picture was the leader and all of the group all pushing the cart together. Okay. Yeah. And I just thought that's Yeah. I think it's leadership. I think and it's generally one man. I think that kind of leadership is, for me, I just see the huge benefits of team leadership. And it's something I think recognizing as church formed behind mission with Bounce, and realizing we need to do something else, realizing that I'm not that gifted in teaching and preaching, and actually we need others, and building team and recognizing where my weaknesses are and bringing other people on. And, at the moment we have a team, and it's always been about team leadership in any aspect, whether it's teaching, whether it's worship, whether it's team, staff team, and the other jobs I'm in, it's always team as well. And recognizing that Neil's much better at this. Let Neil do this and I'll do this part. Yeah. And recognize that and valuing it. And that kind of, working together. It's not just one person who's able to do it all. It just doesn't, it's not good.
So how did Bounce evolve into Urban Junction then?
It's just God at work, really, and opening doors. We were running the disco. We've been running for a few years, engaging with kind of those teenage, kind of 13, 14 up to 17, 18, and recognizing really that there's other people in the community. So these teenagers who are coming along to the disco have younger brothers and sisters. We started there. We started recognizing, started doing stuff with kids, did kind of camps, kind of weekly activities, and then realizing that those kids had parents and grandparents and there was other people. So we've started lots of different things. I remember there was one woman, we were going around at Christmas handing out boxes of chocolates to people, and I remember one woman talking about board games. She's like, would you ever do board games for older people? You know, because we'd been mainly youth focused. And it just came out of that conversation. I said, well, let's meet up in January. Let's play board games. So myself and Anne met and we played Scrabble. She loves Scrabble. She beat me every time. But it's just started with that. And that's since evolved into a really strong, amazing ministry that Belinda leads with others, connecting adults in the community, older adults, unemployed, long-term unemployed people. And it's amazing space to be in and just see how important that space is for people. So it just evolved as you listen to the community and hear the community. And I think one of those initial conversations I remember having with a teenager, someone was doing a talk from the front, thinking that they just wanted to hear, we would just tell them stuff. And someone asked a question and it threw us completely. And the talk collapsed and it was terrible. But actually, because of that question, we ended up connecting in a different forum and we sat around like this and chatted. And I think so much of mission and so much of how we engage with the community is listening to what's going on. Not just listening to the community, but listening to where God is as well. The story I always think is the Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, where, you know, Philip's walking alongside the chariot. God says to walk alongside and listen. And he hears what the Ethiopian eunuch's talking about and he goes up and joins in the conversation. He starts from where he's at. And I just think, as we do that in community, it's listening for those conversations, those things that disrupt. And, you know, at the time it was like, oh no, she's asked a question and we didn't answer it very well. It was terrible. Actually, those disruptions are sometimes the time where God's at work and sets us off on a different track. So there's been a few of those over time, I think. And that's evolved to lots of different things. And there is a worshiping community there now, and that's evolved out of mission and discipleship, I suppose.
I love that example, actually, of Philip. I think it's brilliant. It's a brilliant story, isn't it? God was already reading Isaiah when Philip arrived. And then actually, what happened after that? There's like literally a conversation.
Yeah.
And then this eunuch's taking the gospel back to Africa.
Yeah, amazing.
So good.
Yeah.
And it shows the importance actually of the small conversation that you had with Anne that led to the board games that led to something more.
Yeah.
You know, it's how important is relationships.
Yeah, I think when you're in a community, and I remember even before starting working there, I remember having a conversation, random person on the bus pointing out, you know, we're slagging my accent, was saying I was sounding really posh, and realizing I was about to start working in Blackrock, and these were kids with a different accent, different upbringing, different context, and going, yeah, how am I going to engage? I'm you know, I don't speak the same language, I don't know, and so much of it is just presence and being there. And, you know, it's 25 years later. Initially, it took a long time to build those relationships. It took a long time to trust. And, you know, now walking around Blackrock, we have an opportunity to chat with lots of people that we've known over the years. Relationship is so key. Particularly, I know, Neil, you know, there's a lots of times where people are living close and engaged in the community. And for us, we weren't. So it was different and was harder in that way. But yeah, relationship is really important to trust. You know, we can speak to people, we can preach to people, we can tell people stuff, and there's an element where that really works and God works through it, absolutely. But I think so much of the time is the sitting down beside, playing the Scrabble, reading a story, reading the Bible with that person. Yeah. Those are kind of long-term relationships are really crucial. Yeah,
I remember someone saying that 80% of good evangelism is listening.
Yeah.
Massively.
Yeah, definitely.
So obviously now, Urban Junction, we talked about there, is transformed into something really cool. And your time there is maybe coming to an end shortly, which is probably pretty sad for you as well, actually, but probably quite exciting at the same time.
Yeah, it is a little bit sad. It just feels right. You know, we could keep going until we're because the three of us are stepping down. It just feels the right time. Feels the right time for someone else to come in and take it on. You know, you can hold on to something for too long and it'll be your thing. You know, it's been flipping ages in some ways. It's like 24 years. I've been there 25 years, so it's been a long time. And I love it. It's a great place. I love the people there. I love the opportunities there. And our hope is that we would stay part of that community if we can, if that works. But sadness, excitement about the future. And I suppose my heart has always been for starting new things and looking to new things. So I'm excited about possibilities, you know, beyond that then, I suppose, as well.
New things spreading up.
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously, I loved earlier on. It almost felt earlier on in the podcast if I give you a cue card because you actually used Church Beyond the Walls. I thought, oh, he's very good. He's very good. So this is what the podcast is about. We want this to be a little resource for people to start getting the creative juices flowing and to start to thinking about mission, more prominently maybe than they maybe have previously, and maybe seeing the importance. How do you wear lots of hats? We talked about this earlier. You're obviously massively involved in praxis. You have your school chaplaincy hat on. You have your urban junction. And as you look at church, the church in Ireland, are we going right? Are we going wrong? From a missional perspective, where do we need to rethink things? How do we need to reimagine things as we move? You know, there will be people who will be watching this podcast from a very traditional church background, and the idea of mission is very scary to them. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to do it. They don't even know how to. They don't even know what to pray as they ask God to lead them on it. How would you share with those people?
Yeah, I remember. I was only thinking about a few days ago. There, I did a degree in the Irish Bible Institute in Dublin, and I did a dissertation. I did a degree over about 7 years. It took ages, but I did dissertation at the end around church planting, and I interviewed 3 or 4 church planters that were happening, plants that were happening at the time, and this interview how they did it, how they went about doing it. And I remember it was probably the morning that I was supposed to hand it in. I was writing the introduction or the start of it, and I remember looking at the news or reflecting on the news that morning and just seeing all the stuff that was happening. And I kind of put that into my introduction, kind of, this was happening. I can't even remember, it was 15 years ago, specifically what it was. And just the idea that the church is in a world that's ever changing. And, I read the news this morning when I was having my breakfast, and you see that the world is in turmoil and changing, and it always is. And I think so much of my learning and understanding over the past number of years is, if the world is changing, how does the church engage with that? And we have a message about freedom and grace. We have a story about what the kingdom looks like through how Jesus speaks. And there's lots of stuff. We have a message that is unchanging and powerful and transformative. But I think we have to understand the ways we talk about it, the models that we use, the methods that we use. We tend to stick with those longer than the world sticks with lots of stuff. And as a church, whether it's an older church, a younger church, whatever it is, that always has to be ever changing. We always have to be thinking about what we're saying. Is it engaging? If I go and live in Spain, I'm going to have a limited impact if I only speak in English. I need to speak in Spanish. Yeah. I need to learn Spanish. I also need to learn the culture in Spain. And I think we assume a lot of the time that the church is speaking the right language and is assuming the right culture. And actually, a lot of the time we need to rethink, yeah, we did something 10 years ago, it was really effective, but is it now? And I think sometimes my understanding of my growing up with church was people will come into the church if we sing louder and we do a better version of church. Yeah. But I know, and that might have worked back then to an extent, but I know now there's lots of people aren't looking for a better version of church. People aren't looking for a better version of something they don't want or think they need. Yeah. So we need to think about how are we engaging with people well. And I think one of the challenges, but also one of the joys of being in school is working with young people, so they're teenagers, 13 to 18, and just seeing the conversations they have and how they see faith and how they understand faith really keeps you on your toes. Because I go from, on a Friday when I'm in school talking to students about faith and where they're at, and then on Tuesday I'm talking to a church leader about something else, and just there's kind of a widening gap between how the church sees the church's role versus how young people see it. And I'm not saying that young people are right in saying how the church should act, but we need to take into account culture and where people are at and the questions people are asking in order to do that. And that'll look different in Branniel, it'll look different in Dublin, it'll look different in Cork, it'll look different in Belfast, wherever it might be. But it's asking the questions of how are people understanding what we're saying here. The message is still the same, there's still that truth, but we need to share it in a different way. We need to use different models and methods. We need to always be changing that. And I think the culture that we created in Urban Junction has always been a way of change. So every Sunday looks different. Things look different all the time. And some people hate that and don't hang around, and that's fine. But because we've had that kind of change is okay, we've been able to adapt and change. Like during COVID, we were able to change very quickly, adapt very quickly. We broke into small groups and home groups. We were able to do stuff quickly because people were used to change. Yeah. So I think rather than giving kind of specific examples, sometimes it is just is being open to read the culture well. Now John Stott, and he probably quoted someone else about, having the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other hand. Yeah. It's, well, what's the new version of the newspaper? How are we reading the news? How are we reading social media? How are we engaging a culture that's here with the truth of the gospel, the truth of the Bible here, and how do we do that well? And that looks different in different places. I think the church needs to be a bit more creative. I'm excited about, the pioneering stuff that the Methodist Church is doing. You see it in the Church of Ireland, the Presbyterian Church as well, pushing that edge. And it's a small and it's a niche area. But I think always pushing that helps not only the church engage with a culture that's further out. I love that idea of kind of going where the church isn't, or your church beyond the walls. How do we engage in a culture there? Because I think that also informs the centre, informs the existing church and helps the existing church evolve and change.
I loved during Forge, we'll talk about that again in a wee second actually. I will leave that to the end. Might be a nice wee plug because there's some stuff coming up soon. But I loved was what picture you had on the screen one day, and you talked us through on Honduras.
The
Honduras bridge.
Yeah.
And they built this absolutely beast bridge because obviously Honduras is big for hurricanes. And they planted this bridge and it was absolutely beautiful. It was well built. The hurricane was never going to move this bridge, but it did move the river which ran underneath the bridge, and the bridge then became useless.
Yeah.
And that idea of, the bridge and the river worked really well at one stage.
Yeah.
But culture has changed, the river has moved.
Yeah.
And we're still sometimes quite far apart. I loved that. I thought it was a really, really good picture.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a cool picture.
Yeah.
You could pop it on the screen maybe.
Yeah.
But no, it's a really good picture because it's just literally just bridge in the middle of nowhere and you see the river far in the distance.
Yeah.
And how much of our church is still going over the bridge that's here rather than trying to engage where people are. And that's difficult. I'm not saying we should change. I'm not saying we should change what we're saying, what the message, because sometimes we can think that we become more liberal in how we share stuff, but we just need to engage differently with culture and be where people are and be a bit more incarnational and listen well and engage well.
It's funny, when I was thinking of that picture again, and I will put it on the screen actually, but I think it's funny that I think I actually remember saying possibly, I know many places where the boys would be out with the shovels trying to get the river back.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and sometimes we do that. We put in the hard work of just trying to get the river back to where we wanted it and back culture where we wanted it. That's a really good analogy.
It's just not going to happen.
No.
I can't even remember if it was on the reading list, the Forge reading list, but it was a Todd Balsinger and the Canoeing in the Mountains.
Oh yeah.
Great book where the American pioneers were going looking for the Pacific Ocean, and they had their canoes and their oars until they reached the top and found themselves with the Rockies in front of them. And the boats and the oars were absolutely useless now. And it's really good. I recommend you to have a read at it. I'm sort of in the middle of it at the minute, but we are in a place at the minute where culture, what church looked like to this point fitted the culture it was in, but the culture has changed so much now that we need to start thinking creatively and reimagining how things look, because there are people in our communities who don't yet know Jesus, and we need to be able to do that. Diane Holt, who some people I know involved with Thrive Ireland, had a brilliant diagram she used when I was speaking to her one time of our turf, our terms, their turf, their terms. And we work in 3 boxes around the outside of, we have things that are on our turf, our terms. We run a Sunday school. It's on our terms and it's in our buildings.
Yeah.
And then you have things that's in their turf, our terms. So if you run Alpha in the local community centre, then we have, what was the other one?
Their turf, their terms.
Their turf, their terms. That's the box you want to be in. How do we take Jesus into that space and build trust in there and create those opportunities? And we need to start looking for more conversations in that space.
Yeah. And I think that can be scary, Neil, for people. And I think going into those spaces, you don't control what happens. You don't control the conversation. You're invited guest. It's a good friend who runs Socrates Cafe, which they run every few weeks. He's a waiting list for people. There's a few hundred people on his page. He runs it with a guy who's a non-Christian, and it's a space for conversation around the table, and he sees himself as he has one seat around the table, but other people have seats around the table, and it's that change of posture, of way of listening, being respectful for other people's opinions. And there's been amazing fruit out of that. It hasn't turned into hundreds of people coming to faith necessarily, but people are on a journey. But it's been in those spaces where you don't control the terms or the turf. It's a neutral space. It's a space where you don't control the conversation. You have an equal voice around the table. And I think it can be scary. And I think sometimes for churches as well, it's, well, what do we give up? Well, if we do that, then what do we need to change? And I think sometimes it comes back to that simple question of, well, what is church? And asking that question, What is church? Is stained glass windows church? Is organ church or hymns church or worship music church? Is sitting in rows church? Is small groups church? And I think we all have different answers to those questions. I don't think necessarily there's one straight answer, but we all need to ask that question of, well, what is church? And what, therefore, if this is church, this is the minimum of what we would call church, well, then the other things are things that we like.
Yeah.
And then we can make a choice of whether we want to stick with those or not. Do we need a building? No, of course we don't need a building to be church. It could be useful because you can do things like you do here.
Yeah.
You can do things. So there's positives to those things.
Yeah.
We need to ask the questions of what is that minimum of what church is.
Yeah. Could also be negatives at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think sometimes our buildings can be places where we like to lock ourselves in.
Can
and it
be.
feels like, and actually sometimes we see mission as the invitation to the building.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does it look like to take the people who spend time in the building to the community?
Yeah.
That in which you're placed in.
Absolutely.
You're placed
Yeah.
in. It's a big question. Praxis. Awesome. Or the resources that you guys put together are absolutely fantastic. I would encourage anyone who is watching this to connect in with some of the stuff, praxismovement.ie.
Yeah.
We plug. Some of the resources and stuff you guys have produced and some of the conversations and stuff you facilitate are really, really, really good. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Neil.
And encourage more people to get involved in that. What's going on praxis-wise at the minute?
Yeah, again, Praxis is made up of lots of different people with lots of different perspectives and bringing people together. You've been part of the annual gathering where we bring people together in different streams, and people who are pioneering, people who are in business, people who are in working, people in marginalised in cities. So it's lots of different things, and it's lots of different people. So there's Praxis Press, which is producing books. There's resources. We have the Shoal course, which we did as a collaborative thing, really, with churches in Dublin. In the hope to kind of help our churches think a little bit more mission, a little bit more creative about where God's at work. And it's been really good, and other churches have taken it on. It's very low budget. We shot it in someone's house, but our hope is from that to help people think a little bit differently about church and mission and how they see their faith, how they see evangelism, how they see social justice, whatever those things. And it's very much about kind of creating space for that conversation.
And just to touch on that is our small group have actually been doing it, and it is brilliant. Really, really good. There's six episodes, six different episodes. I really encourage anyone who is watching. There's a little facilitators course you can do on Zoom or in person occasionally, whatever they're on, just so that it's facilitated well. But it is so good. Yeah,
it is about facilitating the conversation and not coming up with the right answer. It's helping people think and reflect on how they see evangelism, how they see mission, how they see their role in God's kingdom. So that's another part of it. And we do learning communities where people gather together who are mission minded and want to support one another, hear one another, champion one another. And we've been exploring other opportunities. Forge is one of those things, and how do we help train people who want to pioneer, start something new, whether it's a church planter, whether it's someone who is working full-time during the week, who wants to see something in their community started. And last year we started a stream actually around missional enterprise. How do we see kind of redemptive businesses? How do we see things start that generate income but create kind of some sort of kingdom expression in that world? Because a lot of the time we think of business and church as separate. Business gives to church, or we're Christians in our businesses, but actually how do we see a business that's started that is redemptive, that is missional, that is kingdom?
And it's really good. I think we're seeing lots of examples of that now, which is really really good. And we need to encourage it, which I think is important. Very quickly, we'll wrap up. Methodist Church in Ireland. Obviously, this podcast is hopefully all of the guests so far have been part of the Methodist Church in Ireland in one sense or the other. So, what would your hope or your prayer be from a missional perspective for MCI? What would you love to see happening?
Yeah, it's obviously going to, I suppose, be clouded by or guided by my own perspective. I think there's lots of opportunity. I think there's a benefit in the Methodist Church being smaller, that it has the ability to be more adaptable to the culture it's in and work around. You see great examples somewhere like here, Branny O'Neill, and seeing the things that you've done, and the church is engaged and embraced, and that's been really encouraging, really positive. I think there's lots of churches who are, and I think it's a positive thing, where there's a little bit more desperation, or a little bit more out of COVID. There's a lot less people, and people are wanting, you mentioned earlier, people wanting to, they want to see something happen, just don't know how to go about it. And I think if we can harness that and help people express that, hear stories, be trained in a particular way, whatever it is, to see something different. So I think God brings us to sometimes to those places where we need to do something. And I've seen that, and I'm sure you've seen up here as well, but in Dublin, where churches realised it's not a competition anymore. It's not a competition with denominations. There's much more of it. We need to work together on this. Yeah. So there's positive opportunities. I obviously Pioneer Mission is something I'm really excited about, having done it for whatever number of years and now helping people do it. I just see lots of life and creativity and opportunities in that. And I think Methodist Church, in fairness, has been ahead of the game in that, and talked about Pioneer Mission for a number of years. Some of those things have grown and flourished. Some have started and served a season and then stopped. But it's that kind of experimental side and trying new things. Willing to take the risk and willing to fail. And actually one of the guys who had a big influence on me, Ken Wilson, who died recently, lots of people would probably know. Unbelievable guy, him and others, in fairness, Ruth as well. But Ken had that line, permission to fail, as we started out, and he was backing us and he was supporting us and he was praying for us and he was willing to take the flack for things that we did. But that permission to fail in that space was hugely important. And I think for the church to be able to say to that people, whether it's an individual or a church or a small group, to step into something and say, permission to fail, we'll support you, we'll encourage you, we'll come alongside you. And I think hearing some of the stories that you've talked to people, Neil, on this podcast and other things helps give an imagination. We can't just take what person A does and put it into our situation. But I think hearing some of those stories help us to have that imagination and a willingness to try at least and do something. And, as a home mission department and Pioneer Mission, always willing to support people and help people and, walk with people in that as well.
I think it's one of the things, just we'll wrap up on this actually, is this idea of listening to the community. I think it's really important, isn't it? Especially in pioneering, is I think you can sort of you can see what person A is doing and think, oh yeah, that's really working well for them. Yeah. And just try and transplant it into your context.
Yeah.
Whereas, we sort of think that we have a culture in Northern Ireland, a culture in the Republic of Ireland, but actually there's so many little even subcultures within. Like I think of East Belfast here, and the culture in Braniel is completely different from the culture in Dundonald and in the Lower New Nards Road, just different subcultures. So you can't just transplant it, but actually what does it look like to listen to the community in which you're based in, find out what God's doing there, and seeing what needs to fill that void, so that Jesus can be... And going back to that story of Philip, hearing from God to go and stand close to Ethiopian eunuch and listen to what he was saying and doing. And then I love that line where it just says he started... the guy was reading Isaiah and he just starts from where he's at. It wasn't, I'm coming in, I'm going to tell him now, I'm going to bring in my illustration of what it is. He started where he was at. Yeah. And I think it is listening to the community. It's hearing the Spirit, hearing God at work, where's God at work, and trying to be in that space to facilitate something. And Philip doesn't hang around long. It's not a big, long interaction, but it's being there at that time and being aware of where the Spirit's at work and also aware of what the community's saying and where they're at and trying to step into that space. Thank you so much for being roped into a last minute recording. But when you were here, I couldn't not have you on. Before you go, can I pray for you?
Thank you, Neil.
Would that be okay?
Let's pray.
Lord, just thank you. Thank you for Simon's story. I thank you for all you've done through his life, right away from Bounce now through to giving up his role at Urban Junction for Pastures New and whatever you have in store for him. Just ask for your blessing upon his work in the school, with Praxis and with the Pioneer team and Home Mission Department at MCI. Lord, I pray for his family and I ask for your hand to be upon them in this transition season into whatever you have ahead. Thank you for the encouragement that he is to those in Pioneer Mission and those of us that have had the privilege of engaging with him. And I just pray that our conversation today has maybe helped those watching stir up some creative juices and reimagine how they can connect with people beyond the walls. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Neil.
And he's part of the Man United Supporters Club as well, which is great news. Right, we'll catch you next. And our next guest on the podcast is the Reverend Dr. Stephen Scouse, who is Church's growth officer.
That's
something
it.
Like that.
Yeah. Reverend Doctor. He's more words before his name than I do. He's much more intelligent and professional.
We'll find out on the next podcast. See you on the next one.